So, as I mentioned, I'm Arial Kalishman Walsh. I'm the Director of Enterprise Partnerships at BlocPower. BlocPower's mission is greener, smarter, healthier buildings for all. And I'll talk a little bit about how we work with local communities to deliver that through our building electrification and clean energy workforce development that we've been doing since 2014. I'm so happy to be here to talk about this mission of building smarter, greener, healthier buildings for all, or retrofitting existing buildings rather. We do this by reducing fossil fuel consumption and pollution in energy systems. And this presentation has a little bit of intro, maybe redundant for some of you, but I wanted to make sure we all understood the reasons for this. So I'm going to do a little bit of conversation about that. As many of you may know, in the US, 30% of greenhouse gases come from buildings. That number can go up or down depending on the specific community, but that's the average across the country. And in the US, Americans spend most of our time indoors to do all sorts of stuff, living and working. And poor ventilation and air quality issues can make all that time spent indoors very unhealthy. But we have the ability, and buildings can be the engines of power and change and opportunity. So we have the necessary tools and technology to make the impact in retrofitting buildings a positive one. And at BlocPower, we're starting with the buildings and communities that need it the most. So electrifying buildings can increase energy affordability, can build healthier communities, and can help create good and green jobs. As you may know, a lot of what BlocPower does is retrofit buildings through taking out gas-burning space heating equipment and hot water, as well as induction stoves. And air source heat pumps can not only remove fossil fuel combustions from buildings, but they have air filtration systems that can actually improve indoor air quality beyond just removing that gas-burning element from the space heating and hot water. So that's a little bit about why it's important to electrify buildings. And of course, I didn't even mention weatherization, which is so important and something that we deliver. I'll talk about a little bit more. But a little bit more about BlocPower, and I'm going through a little quickly so we have time at the end for Q&A, just because we got started a little late. But if you want to hop in and interrupt me at any point and ask a question to slow down, I'm happy to slow down during the conversation. So please consider this an invitation to chat. So BlocPower is a Black-owned climate tech company that was founded in 2014. We're focused, as I mentioned, on greening and modernizing residential and commercial buildings. We've completed over 1,200 retrofits to date. And we do that through designing, implementing, and financing energy efficiency and electrification projects. You can see some of our partners and investors on the lower left. We have investors from Wall Street and Silicon Valley. We have partnerships with states and utilities and local governments. And they work with us because we've developed a couple tools that really break down the barriers to building decarbonization and energy efficiency at scale, particularly with a focus on low and moderate income communities. So we have software, a platform that helps us cut out costs from identifying buildings that are appropriate for targeting and project design. We have financing, which enables building owners who don't have access to capital to get these energy saving and energy efficiency improvements with no money up front. We offer community mesh Wi-Fi to connect hard to reach community members through affordable mesh networks to bridge the digital divide and also help us connect our all electric equipment installations to the internet, and so that electric utilities can use them as part of their demand response programs. And we have a focus on workforce training and community engagement. Our goal is all electric buildings. And in communities like Ithaca, that's also added to as a goal by renewable energy and other sources of zero carbon electricity. So while BlocPower doesn't have anything to do with the grid source of energy, it's something we do support. So we're looking to work for electrification because it improves health. It's a tool to address equity issues in communities. So directing benefits towards disadvantaged communities. It obviously addresses climate change through reduction in fossil fuel consumption and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Um, Again, in communities like Ithaca, we're partner, and in New York City and elsewhere, we're partnering to do green workforce development. Um, and there's a lot of aligned financial incentives. And in Massachusetts, there's many that you all are likely very aware of. And as we work in communities to help projects get done, we're ensuring that all of those financial incentives that are available to individual property owners are being captured. Part of that is how we actually update buildings. So BlocPower provides turnkey services to address inefficiencies in the marketplace. Some of you on this call may know very intimately what it's like to retrofit a building, an existing building, and it's really complicated. Property owners have to navigate incentives and permits from governments and utilities. They have to address engineering. They have to know about the technology first. And if they do, they have to find a contractor who will install it, which can be challenging as this market transformation takes place. Many existing installers are still doing like for like replacements of gas furnaces, oil boilers. And crucially, building owners also oftentimes have to find financing. So navigating all of this takes a lot of time, and it adds unnecessary costs for the project. So what BlocPower has done is we're delivering a one-stop shop solution for building owners by working with local partners in any given market where we work. So we coordinate the engineering, the construction contractors, who are all local contractors that we work with, the equipment purchase, the financing, the incentive, and permitting navigation. And we do that, which helps us reduce upfront costs for property owners and keep the costs low. So we're looking to keep that cost low for property owners by adding efficiencies, but also making it so that property owners can access these upfront, these retrofits through our lease with no upfront costs. So we have a no money down lease. It's a 12 to 15-year lease that covers all of our project planning, the installation of energy saving equipment. We can add weatherization. We even are able to underwrite upgrades like health and safety measures, lead, mold, and asbestos mitigation. We include preventative maintenance, so twice a year visits to ensure the equipment is being managed properly. There's remote controls on the equipment, so there's monitoring. And there's no money down. So we pay for all of the installation and all of that up front, and it's the costs of the project are being paid over the 12 to 15-year lease life. There's predictable monthly payments, there's a performance guarantee, and really crucially, which is a difference from a lot of like residential PACE programs, is the no lien on the building. Now, I know in Massachusetts, and I apologize, I don't know about Cape Ann specifically, if you guys are served by the heat loan, if you guys have access to that, or if you're a municipal light plant community. Which one are you?
Municipal. We have our own municipal aggregation.
Okay.
We're not municipal light. We have National Grid.
You have National Grid. So residential, so single family homes are eligible for the heat loan, which is that 7-year no money, 0% interest. I think it's a $25,000 cap loan. Is that right? So, Massachusetts is a little different, but in a lot of communities, there's a residential PACE opportunity that does require a lien on the property, and it even supersedes the mortgage. And for some property owners, particularly low and moderate income property owners, that's caused problems, and that's like caused people to lose their homes because they haven't been able to repay that. So we would never want to put anyone in the position of potentially losing their property because of these upgrades, endeavoring to like improve the health and quality of their property. So there's no lien on the building. It's just collateralized against the equipment itself. And those are some of the things that make our lease different. We also typically target small and medium businesses, which are oftentimes not accessing these types of upgrades, multifamily properties that if they're not really large properties in urban areas, they're also struggling to access these types of upgrades and financing. So we're really excited about making this lease offer and enabling upgrades for properties that are typically struggling to access financing for these upgrades. Our upgrades aren't like a standard package also. So we're able to offer a variety of equipment and energy conservation measures depending on what the property itself needs and what the property owner can afford. So we install all electric space heating and hot water. We can do other appliances like dryers and induction stoves. Again, all of those other energy efficiency measures, particularly air sealing and insulation, which are so important for switching over to all electric space heating. We can do health and safety measures, as I mentioned. We can do on-site solar, but if that's not appropriate or wanted, we really encourage property owners to enroll in community solar so that's going to offset some of those costs of electricity heating post-electric retrofit. And if on-site solar is appropriate, we can also pair it with battery storage. So it all just depends. They're custom project scopes, and a lot of factors go into making sure it makes sense for property owners. But how do we go from individual projects? So that's a lot about what BlocPower does to help individual property owners navigate the current sort of murky waters of building retrofits. So we do that, but our real value proposition to communities is scaling that to large scale programs. And we do that through a couple different things. We have a couple tools that really allow us to provide services to cities and utilities to deliver these retrofits at scale. So we have data and technology, including what we call block maps, which is a planning tool and insight tool for electrifying and retrofitting buildings in neighborhoods and cities across the US. We have financing, as I mentioned, this responsible financing to bridge capital and incentives. And we have community-driven enablers like job creation through workforce development and connectivity through Wi-Fi. One example of how we did this was in New York City. Con Ed and the Mayor's Office of Sustainability hired us to manage a 500 building project to reduce peak demand in a certain neighborhood in Brooklyn. We completed the project under budget and a year ahead of schedule. And that's where we developed some of our software, including using utility data and sensor data to recommend equipment upgrades by building, and where we brought in local contractors to do energy efficient equipment in all of these buildings. And we developed our community advisory board model. We know as outsiders to a lot of communities, even in New York, where we're based, we're considered outsiders in some neighborhoods because we're not from a specific neighborhood, and New York is obviously huge. So we understand that coming into new communities, it's really important to work with local leaders who've been working on these issues for years, local community-based organizations, build trust with local leaders and contractors. And that's where we developed that model. It's based on a community outreach model and a community organizing model that our co-founders our founder and co-founder were trained in. And it helps us really deliver on overcoming some of the barriers of trust. And in a lot of low and moderate income communities, there's a huge trust issue with city, government services, with utility services, because the interactions are typically around when you owe money from those communities. And so there's not a lot of trust. There's a lot of predatory behavior from different organizations that are outsiders. And it's really important for BlocPower to develop that trust through these relational meetings, through engaging with CBOs that have been on the ground around environmental justice, community justice, et cetera, and understand that one of the best things we can do is do a few lighthouse projects, retrofitting, say, churches or community buildings, community centers, where there's a local leader with a lot of trust from local community members who can understand the value proposition of retrofitting a building, then can benefit from it. And then people can come in, talk to them about their experience with working with BlocPower, talk to them about their experience with the technology. While this technology is not new, air source heat pumps, it's pretty new in most of North America, most of the US. And so there's a distrust of it, and there's a lot of misinformation about it because older versions of this technology maybe didn't perform as well, but it performs incredibly well now. It's being used across Northern Europe and Asia. There's parts of the US where there's been enormous adoption, including up in Maine, where it's very cold. And it's just very important for people to feel that trust with BlocPower and with the technology itself. So that's where we developed this model of converting some lighthouse projects, whether it's houses of worship or community centers, and getting local leaders, whether they're political or advocates or they own a lot of properties, whoever it is, to come in, work with BlocPower and provide some of that word of mouth marketing and trust building. Sorry, this slide is what I should have turned to. Community-based, our community advisory board, they provide feedback on our outreach strategies, our messaging. They partner with us on events, meetings, and marketing, and they provide direct introductions to building owners. In Ithaca, we've done over, I think it's now 100 stakeholders that we've engaged on our listening tour to date. This is a little bit more about our software. This is something that we work with communities across the country. In Massachusetts, we're working with Cambridge on this, and it's a great way to get started for communities interested in working with BlocPower. It's something we're doing with Ithaca, with some cities in the Southeast, along the West Coast. And we bring together data from our partners to model buildings, thermodynamics, performance. We bring in building analytics and visualization tools. And the data can also be used in building owner-facing tools to make stakeholder engagement easy and compelling. In New York City, as well as in Ithaca in the future, we're doing workforce development. And this really ties into the whole market transformation of building electrification, because there's a real constraint in the number of contractors and workforce who are trained in the necessary upgrades to decarbonize buildings. And so in New York City, we're training individuals from disinvested communities to strengthen and diversify and expand the clean energy workforce. We have a large contract with the city to train participants through a 6-month paid training and apprenticeship program. And participants from New York City have installed Wi-Fi in public housing, done EV charging stations and solar on roofs. They've trained on HVAC conversions, air quality monitoring. And something similar is what we're going to do in Ithaca with a green jobs corridor, where they've proposed to work with 3 other cities near them, because Ithaca isn't as big as New York City, obviously. And so they can draw from communities and community members around the region to provide training and adequate jobs afterwards. Because one of the really important things about workforce training is making sure that there's adequate job placement afterwards. And that's so important for the virtuous cycle to continue of this clean energy transition. So we have a lot of tools. We know that cities have a lot of challenges. Local governments face all sorts of challenges in hitting their greenhouse gas emissions goals, accessing community members and LMI communities to provide retrofits, dealing with underemployment. So BlocPower provides all these solutions. I'm not going to go through this, but I'll happily provide you with the deck afterwards so you can look through this. And we partner with communities in different ways. So we start with either our software or a pilot, and then we go to a scaled public-private partnership program to provide at scale these large numbers of building electrification retrofits that are enabled through software and staffed through workforce development. Our vision for public-private partnership is raising private capital, which we've done a lot of through our partnership with Goldman Sachs, through Microsoft's Climate Fund, through others. It's something that we can do in other communities. Tapping into a network of local private partners, whether that's Fortune 500 companies, foundations, provide cash support for program management and buying down project costs, retrofitting buildings with local contractors, getting local government support for marketing outreach data, like I was talking about for block maps, as well as making sure that they're enabling the retrofits at scale through updates to their permitting process, making sure there's enough inspectors on staff, all that kind of stuff is necessary from local governments. And then additional value, that Wi-Fi digital divide partnership, making sure healthcare organizations and schools often are participating as well. Where we're doing it in like the largest scale is Ithaca, which Susan was mentioning, and Candace, where Ithaca has committed to retrofitting their entire community. They're a city of about 30,000. They have about 6,000 buildings, and they're looking to decarbonize them in 2 phases. They've hired BlocPower to do program management, to bring in financing for those retrofits, and to bring our expertise through software and the turnkey retrofit services that we provide to property owners. So it's something that we're doing with with Ithaca at that scale. But as I mentioned earlier, we're working with other cities all along the spectrum, and we're not expecting every city to commit at scale like this. Some cities are committing to 500 buildings at first. Some cities want to start with just software. So we understand that cities are all along the spectrum of readiness to engage with building electrification. And we're ready to support wherever they're at and to help them achieve their goals. So thank you. I hope that seeded a lot of questions, answered some questions. I'm going to stop sharing and open the floor, Susan, Candace, however you'd like to move forward. I'm happy to do a Q&A now or anything else.
I know people raise their hand if they have a question. I just know that there's so many things that you mentioned. I have a question on every single bit, but I'll listen to other people's questions.
Susan, could I just cut in for 1 second? I have to get off the webinar because we're having an equipment malfunction in our home right now. And so I have to go attend to that problem. But I just wanted to put in a question, which was what happens if there are local supply chain problems with both getting equipment or with not having enough local contractors who have time available to start doing all this installation? And I'll check back with the rest of you to hear what you say, but I really do have to go now. So thank you, Ariel. That was an excellent presentation.
Thanks. Yeah. Those constraints are very real. We have partnerships with original equipment manufacturers, all the major air source heat pump HVAC manufacturers, and many of the heat pump hot water manufacturers, as well as some of the big box stores like Lowe's, to help us mitigate those supply chain issues. There's also a lot being done nationally. You may have seen President Biden's declaration, executive order, and invoking the DPA. So there's going to be a lot more work being done to onshore and do manufacturing in the US, so that some of those supply chain issues can be mitigated at a much higher level than a company like BlocPower can influence. But we're very excited to see that, because we know that making sure that air source heat pumps are on all of the installers' trucks instead of gas-fired furnaces and gas-fired hot water heaters will really be important to the transformation. As far as making sure there's adequate contractors, that's also a complex issue, not just in your community. And it's something that's being addressed through multiple prongs. Making sure that there is adequate jobs for electrification as a pipeline will help ensure that contractors will switch their lines over from doing like for like replacements, as they are typically doing right now, to investing in making sure that they're doing electrification retrofits. Right now, electrification retrofits are a little bit more complicated than the like for like replacements. And that's because oftentimes buildings need electrical panel upgrades to support the added load from the electrical equipment. So that can add a complicating layer to it. And many existing contractors are so inundated with work as it is that there's a little incentive for them to switch over. So ensuring that there's going to be a pipeline of work for them in the electrification space, like by doing some sort of declaration of saying we're going to support retrofitting 500 buildings in this time period, will help them commit to switching over. There also needs to be adequate workforce. So a lot of contractors are constrained by hiring. And so they want to expand, but there's not enough trained workforce for them to hire. So that's something that, as I was mentioning, sort of like the systems issue, making sure we're committing to building electrification, but also supporting the workforce that needs to go with it, and supporting the contractors who want to expand to do that. I think it's complicated and there's a lot to be done, and it's a whole entire market transformation that needs to be addressed. So BlocPower is there to support a lot of those aspects, but there needs to be political will to go forth with building decarbonization. There needs to be support from, whether it's making sure that local community colleges are offering those trainings, or there's training going, there's funding for training. There's a lot of money coming out of the bipartisan infrastructure law that can be dedicated to funding for workforce development, for clean energy transition, and other ways to address it. But it is a complicated issue. I know Candace left, but I'll just acknowledge there's a lot of factors that go into it. I see something in the chat. BlocPower is a for-profit corporation. Yes, Dick, that's correct. We do have a nonprofit arm, but we are a for-profit corporation, and our theory is that we really need to make sure that this market transformation is being supported and invested in from multiple angles. So there's roles to be had for government, there's roles to be had for nonprofits and community-based organizations, and there needs to be for-profit companies involved in this transformation, including investors willing to provide low-cost capital to fund these to finance these types of transformations.
Could I ask about the economics? When you do electrification, you're replacing fossil fuel cost with electricity cost, and Massachusetts has extremely high electricity cost.
Yep.
Are you seeing much of an advantage even in switching from gas to electricity in Massachusetts? I know oil is going to be a different story.
No, you're totally right. So we look to figure out that's part of why we have software, and we look to target buildings where the economics make sense and air source heat pumps are feasible. So market by market, the gas costs in some markets are much lower than electricity costs, and we're absolutely seeing that in Massachusetts. And you're right. So the gas, propane are where the post-electrification operating cost expenses are much more favorable to switching to electric, particularly with solar. However, we're also seeing that natural gas is becoming a global commodity, and the costs on natural gas are just going to keep rising. And as different utilities bring on more renewables, including in Massachusetts, the electricity costs and the natural gas costs are going to get closer and closer. So what our theory is that we need to target the buildings where electrification makes sense, either because of that ongoing operating costs, where oil boilers are aging out and we can replace those with all electric, or there's some property owners who are going to say, my natural gas is aging out and I'm willing to take that stand because I am committed to the reasoning. And so we need to get that pipeline of buildings switching over and not doing like for like, or not doing, super efficient gas furnace switch over, but doing the electric. And making sure that we're growing the contractor market and workforce at the same time, so that as those gas costs get closer to electricity costs, there's adequate contractors and workforce to serve all of those transitions as well, conversions as well. Yeah. I see a lot of hands. Does someone else want to facilitate, or if you guys just want to self-identify, or I can just go down the list? Susan, I think you're on mute. Do you want to?
You can tell what a wonderful host I am. I am.
You are. No, don't apologize.
I'm gonna shoot myself. Joe, do you want to hop in? I know your hand has been. Do you have a question, Joe?
I don't see Joe's hand up. I see
All
Lisa,
right.
Roberta, Laura, and Dick.
All
So
right.
I'll just go down the list in order where I see it. Lisa,
Okay.
you're on top in my list.
All right. Well, one of the things is when people talk about the cost of gas versus heat pumps. One thing about heat pumps is they're also air conditioning. So
Mhm.
it's a lot cheaper to use those as air conditioners than they would be those window kind of.
You're 100% right.
But that wasn't my question. My question was, what were some of the stumbling blocks that you had when you were doing Ithaca? Like, what were your big hurdles?
Well, to be clear, we're just launching Ithaca now. We've signed the Common Council has approved signing the contract, and the mayor is supposed to sign it later this week. So we're early stages there. We've done a lot of data gathering, a lot of outreach. We're poised to work with buildings because we have almost $100 million in financing we're bringing to the table. We're working through a DOE loan program office loan to get $1 billion to bring to deploy in Ithaca and beyond in New York State. But I think a lot of the hurdles are similar to what you all are identifying. While electricity is a lot cheaper up in Ithaca, natural gas is still cheap. There's an enormous number of rental units in Ithaca. So a lot of property owners who are not local, who have the split incentive issue, which you may be familiar with, where property owners would be paying for the upgrades and tenants pay the utility bills. So the property owners don't get those bill savings from the upgrades. So the convincing of that is a challenge to endeavor, to invest in those upgrades. While it does improve the property, it improves the tenant's experience. Property owners who are paying for that lease upgrade aren't necessarily getting the savings immediately, although it does reduce turnover from renters and it increases satisfaction. And so there can be some real benefits that we see landlords having. But, I think it's complicated. There's also a constraint among contractors up there, although there has been a lot of investment in New York and in Tompkins County, where Ithaca is located, in electrification. And there is definitely a network of contractors, definitely not enough to convert 6,000 buildings in the time frame that is necessary yet. So we're going to be growing that, and we're supporting that. And there's a lot of stakeholders in Ithaca who are invested in that. So stumbling blocks are things that we know, and then I think there's going to be things we don't know that we encounter that we're going to be working with all of the stakeholders at the table. I think what we're really excited by is the political will that the city of Ithaca, its population, Luis, its mayor, and Common Council are showing. And I think it's really inspiring a lot of communities like Cape Ann to think through what's possible and how ambitious they can be.
As a follow-up question, are you driving it, or is the city, Ithaca, going to be driving it, or is it a joint, your program?
Yeah, so the city has contracted with us to drive this program.
Okay.
There's a lot of shared responsibilities in what we're mapping out and what we've mapped out amongst us. The city is going to be driving a lot of knowledge sharing, information, outreach, etc. They're responsible for a lot of education and engagement. And then we're responsible for assessing buildings, for providing project plans, for engaging with any property owners who do want to retrofit. there isn't a mandate in Ithaca that all the buildings electrify. This is a goal that we're looking to approach through market-based solutions. And so there's shared goals, and the city is going to work on improving their permitting process and a variety of other things that they're able to control for. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'll keep going down the list. Then Roberta, you're next on my list.
Okay, am I unmuted? Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you for having this wonderful meeting, and Ariel for being so articulate and so full of information. This BlocPower sounds wonderful, and I have a number of questions, but the first one is, when you talk about a lease, who is the lessor, who is the lessee, and what is the leased property? I'm not clear on that.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Let me clarify that. So BlocPower works with property owners. So
Yeah.
we don't work with, tenants directly. We work with property owners. And what we lease is technically the all electric heating and hot water equipment. If there's solar included in the scope of the project upgrades, that would be leased. So the hardware equipment. We can also bundle into the lease price weatherization, so air sealing, insulation, water equipment upgrades, faucets, LED lighting. But what would be the leased equipment is the large electric equipment that we install.
So the equipment is what is leased. So if someone defaults on their loan, you take the equipment back.
We could. So first of all, we've had incredibly low default rates to date.
Right.
But what if someone does default, we do have the ability to take it out, but that wouldn't really be in our favor. We're not looking to do that. We do have the controls of the equipment itself, but what we're seeing is if people default, they're probably in a poor position financially, because we definitely don't put anyone in a position where their cash flow wouldn't support paying back this lease, even though there wouldn't necessarily be utility bill savings, which we don't guarantee. We guarantee performance. We're looking at their income and their cash flow versus their existing obligations. So if they're defaulting on our lease, we're likely seeing them in a poor financial position and possibly needing to sell their entire property. And if that happens, our lease can be paid off in the sale, or it can be transferred to the new owner.
And do they have a chance to renegotiate and get some extra time to pay back? Or is that just, in other words, they may not be able to pay it back in 7 years or 15 years, but maybe over 20 years, they could pay it back with interest.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that point, but I think that that's something that we would be looking to do. We're really trying to find ways to say yes to people who wouldn't normally have access to financing. And our financing team is and our customer success team is very responsive. And should that become something that would be a solution for one of our customers, I think we would definitely be interested and amenable in extending the lease or something like that. So while it hasn't been something that we've particularly specifically encountered, absolutely, I think that's on the table.
So the real estate property itself is not the subject of a lease or any kind of...
That's right. We don't put a lien on the property itself. It is just the equipment.
No mortgage. Okay, so the other question is, I've been active in setting up this program we call SISTERS, which stands for Super Insulation and Solar for Energy Resource Security. And it sounds like you're actually doing a lot of the things that we envision. And we would rather partner or turn over this idea to someone who is actually doing it in the real world. And I was wondering if it would be possible sometime to talk with you about that.
Yeah, sure. To be clear, we don't run trucks anywhere. So we're not owning insulation companies or solar companies or
Right.
contractors anywhere. So we wouldn't be able to come over and actually do that. We would be working with local contractors
Right.
anywhere, and we would be offering a lease. And
I-
definitely happy to have a conversation. That sounds really exciting and super forward thinking. So
Do you deal with super insulation? I know you do weatherization, but do you do the actual super insulation where you actually don't need central heating?
we have some super insulation, is that like the external cladding?
It's like an envelope that you put
Yeah,
around.
the envelope around. Yeah, so we're working on financing some projects like that.
Right.
We're again like not a contractor, so we can do financing of projects like that if there's a project that needs financing. And we're really excited by bringing that technology, by the groups that are bringing that technology to communities in the US from abroad. And we see a ton of opportunity for that. So yeah, we are definitely working with project developers who are using that. That's not been our expertise as of yet. So what we're doing is typically providing gap financing or financing projects like that, where there's external cladding similar to that energy sprung model out of Amsterdam.
Right, exactly.
And I think the ones that we're working on do have integrated HVAC.
Integrated what? Excuse me.
HVAC, heating and cooling.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
And so is this correct to say that you are kind of a organizational hub in which you actually reach out and coordinate all these diverse talents that are needed to actually do whatever needs being done, and then you put it all together, and then it's as you say, a one-stop experience for the customer who would be totally overwhelmed trying to put it all together, him or herself. Is that you're kind of a hub, organizational and informational hub that brings it all together into a package and so helps people to navigate this incredibly complex enterprise of getting these things actually installed. Am I on the right track here?
Yeah, exactly. So we see ourselves as a turnkey solution provider, both for project, for individual property owners, as well as for local governments and utilities. So we're doing individual project turnkey solutions because it is so complicated for property owners. It's also really complicated to deliver the programs at scale. So that's what we do. And we enter new markets through programs. So we look for contracts with cities or utilities to enter new markets and provide set up shop and say, if a city is willing to commit to supporting decarbonization of several hundred buildings in a short period of time, we can go in and set up shop to provide turnkey services to the property owners themselves.
Okay, so I've been kind of working with this green communities outreach. So if the whole town of Rockport could hire you basically to come into town and do your magic, right?
Yeah, I mean, we'd definitely be super interested in a conversation. And I think that's so exciting to hear about. I'd be happy to follow up with you later. And you can get my email.
I don't want to take too much of your time. Just one more thing. Is Adrian?
We only have 5 minutes left and we have
Oh,
two
no.
people who
Okay.
need to ask
Okay.
questions.
Oh my God. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Look forward to catching up more later. Laura?
Okay. Bye.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. A couple quick questions. I was wondering, is the software that you use for the thermodynamic evaluation of performance proprietary? Is that something in-house only, or does it have a name? Is it something anybody?
Yeah, it's called Block Maps. It is proprietary. Yep. And we have developed it. We are very excited. We're going to have a free version soon for communities. It won't have the insights like air source heat pump feasibility or energy efficiency potential, but it will be the free version will be available to see just like insights about properties, information about the building stock, etc. The paid instance uses local data that we can integrate. And so we get a higher fidelity information insights. The free version is used on national data, is based on national data sets around real estate that we've acquired and have access to, and a partnership that we have with Oak Ridge National Labs for energy modeling of buildings, which they've done a 125 million building modeling across the US, and we've integrated so that there's some insights, although the paid version does get a higher fidelity based on local data. And then the paid version also has a few more features around air source heat pump feasibility, program planning, modeling, et cetera. But yeah, we're very excited by it.
Well, that was a really cool answer. Thank you. The next question is about, could you give just an estimation, if you can, of what the savings, just in a percentage, maybe area, through the incentives that are going to come to the property owner that you're facilitating to make sure they're maximizing, I'm assuming.
It just is so subjective. It like just depends on what's available. Like every utility has different incentives available. Every state does. It depends on what the property owner is eligible for. Some of them are income qualified, some of them are not. So the incentives can really vary widely. We do find that to make it based on like the costs that we're seeing across the country and based on what's feasible for income qualified customers, we suggest that incentive stacking should reach the 50 to 60% level of project cost to make the lease affordable. But that's not what's happening. It's happening some places, but not everywhere. So there's a lot of gap in a lot of places, but it just really depends.
Okay, and then the last question I have is, are you finding that you're able to do solar with heat pumps? Is that something that you're trying to do?
We're exploring that more and more, and we're actually looking to see if we can do a 25-year like solar PPA with a heat pump replacement mid-cycle. It's something that we think that there's a lot of appetite for and opportunity for. And we're finding individual projects where we're exploring it, and we'd like to expand that further.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. I've got one more minute. So Dick, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask the last question?
Just quickly, could you send us a link to information on your governance, your investors, and your net profit as a for-profit organization? Number one. Number two, is there a minimum? I mean, you say you work with individual building owners. Is there a minimum? What is the scale for you to engage in a discussion, an actual contract? Is it 3 units, 10 units, 100 units? What is?
You mean with for a program?
Yeah, for a program. Is there a dollar minimum?
Yeah, no, we're really looking to find the right fit. It really depends on the market that we're entering and what the scale is. So we'd be so excited to talk to a community. For us to bring in, at scale, similar to what we're doing in Ithaca, we'd be looking for a couple hundred building commitment. But we can also work, in a pilot capacity and provide more limited services to say, here, we're going to target a dozen buildings, and we're going to look to see some information gathering out of that. And BlocPower is going to provide XYZ, and the city or community that we're engaging with is going to provide ABC. I cannot provide those things you're asking for because we're a privately held company. So I can send you a link to our website, but we don't report on like earnings or anything like that in a public way. We're not a public company. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks everyone. Susan has my contact info. You're welcome to reach out if you'd like to. This was so lovely. I really appreciate you all coming together. And Susan, thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you very much.